Jennifer. Welcome to the Shift podcast.
Hi, Elena. It's such a pleasure to be here.
You and I met via networks, which I always love because we get to meet just amazing people. And as we started chatting, and I was like, I have to have a chat with you because of your variety of experience internationally and having worked for large consultancy firms and then kind of drifting into your own as well and really just focus on that communication organizational development today. So can you just kind of kick us off, give my audience a little bit more of a background, just a snapshot of what brought you to where you are today?
Oh, that's a tough question because what I would love to say was vision, grit, and determination. And the truth is, it was a combination of complete cluelessness, courage, and doing the wrong thing enough times until I figured out what was right. And what I mean by that is I started off kind of thinking, okay, I studied international relations. I spent most of my life, actually, even as a child, living as an American expat overseas. And I knew I wanted to do something global. So my first thought, of course, was diplomacy. And again, that's why I have 2 degrees in the topic. But I graduated from grad school right after 9/11 happened. And
Mm.
so the shift in the country moved away from diplomacy to national security. In fact, that's when literally the Department of Homeland Security was set up. And so I had this thought of, what else might this look like? And so I thought, well, I would really love to be a journalist. I was really excited. I lined up an internship at a publication based in Hong Kong. And they said, we're really sorry, but we found out we're closing in 6 months. You're still welcome to come to your internship, but unfortunately, we just wanted to be upfront with you. I'll put a side note there that was such a valuable lesson in integrity for me that I never forgot that they did
Mm.
the right thing and actually told me the truth.
Yeah.
And so I ended up completely coincidentally through networks, actually. There was someone who was an alum of my grad school who was recruiting for a public affairs consulting firm in China. And I said, well, if I don't do diplomacy for the government, what happens if I do this on the corporate side? But it was literally this series of one world event, one corporate decision or occurrence, and then just saying, well, here's someone who at least went to the same school, so we have something in common. What's the worst that will happen if I do a 3-month internship in Beijing? And that 3-month internship ended up turning into a 16-year career.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the how candid it is because you're right. Like sometimes, that's just, I think most career stories are like that. Most people's stories around how they came around is just that. And, when I work with youth or even just like, professionals that are starting off in their careers and everybody's trying to have this plan. And as probably both of us also wanted to have this, like, well, we're going to be a journalist in your case. So for me, I don't even know what I was thinking then. I don't remember, but I was more in like higher education space. And it's interesting where life takes you. It's when you were, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, it's definitely not that plans are bad. Plans are great, but
Yeah.
plans are not everything, and
Mm.
plans are not final. I don't think I would have
Mm.
gotten here if I hadn't taken all of these steps. But when
Mm.
I, at 16, not only thought that I could, but thought that I had to plan my life out. I sit here now at 40, and I'm just thinking, why? Why did I do that to myself? Why does anyone do that to themselves? And it seems to me that young people today are under even more pressure than we were when we were young.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also there's a lot of social media that's out there that's like just skyrocketing and new roles are, created on like, every year there's like something new coming out, even sometimes sooner than that, like the social media manager, right? Like that's a popular one that popped up in the last few years. Like who would have ever thought? And I think there's just so much of information that is coming at young people, and so much misconception and misrepresentation of the world of entrepreneurship. Like you and I talked about this, right? Like over lunch, it's like there's that romanticized version of it, and it's like, but what is it really like? So it's just a trendy thing. And the media just highlights so much of certain things, and for young people, with the amount of just information that's coming to them at a very confusing age of teenagers. I don't know about everybody else, but I was a super confused teenager. It's a lot.
No, absolutely. And what really blows my mind is these kids are being presented with jobs that don't exist yet. I heard that, they're thinking about when do we start recruiting drone traffic controllers.
Mhm.
So it's hard enough to choose among the decisions that exist. But when you think about now, I have to worry, will my job be obsolete in a few years? I
Mhm.
don't feel like that is something that was even on my mind.
Yeah, I think about it too, in the world of like the work that we do. It's part of me is like, I can see how some of it has become, because also, it's kind of, it's a nice to have for a lot of organizations, but you and I both know, and a lot of leaders around the world, of how essential some of the things that we do, right? But nonetheless, there's also the need is different that's coming up. So how do you adjust to the new need, whatever that might look like? Because it might not look like what it is today. Um, but I do, maybe that's the optimist in me, maybe that's the fear in me, I don't know, but I do feel that human connection, that the world of just L&D, learning and development, organizational development, these sort of things, it's there's something to it, and I don't think that can ever be replaced. Maybe not ever, but let me say not in our lifetime. I don't know what you think about that, but
I couldn't agree more. And if there was one thing that I wish we could start with is to stop calling this soft skills,
mm-hmm.
right? Because these are essential skills that we've just come out of a 3-year period that showed us how important communication, connection, collaboration, and creativity are. And yet we still sort of dismiss this as nice to have as opposed to critical.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that is, I think, hard for both of us as well is when times get tough, what's the first budget to get cut? It's that L&D. It's that
Yeah.
human side. And I wish I could tell companies this is exactly the time to double down, because this
Yeah.
is when your narrow resources, the people that you have, matter the most.
Yeah. And it's also in the world of information, how do you help people learn in a way that's effective, right? And I mean, every conference I attend, there's like a new learning tool, but
Mhm.
I have yet to see reports that showcase that that's more effective versus a one-on-one conversation coaching environment with an individual, right? Like it can't be just one or the other. It's a combination of both that really makes that learning effective.
I know we're looking at the supply side and we should be looking at the demand side.
Yeah.
It's not about how many courses are on there, like on a platform, on a portal. It's about what do people want to learn and
Hmm.
how can they be taught in a way that they feel not just engaged, but the learning stays with them.
Yeah, which is so difficult to do. And it's but like, and it's not because if everybody would just learn on their own, and I love this, and like when companies create these LMSs, like, and all these courses and stuff like that, or give access to the Courseiras of this world, and they feel like they've done their job and spend actually a
Mhm.
significant amount of money on L&D, but it's not effective. And then the complaint comes, is like, well, what was the ROI? Well, you didn't invest in the right thing. That's why the ROI is not what you're
Mm.
expecting it to be. Like that wasn't, you didn't, and I feel like people just kind of check the box, like, okay, we need to do this. It's a nice to have. That's what people want, but they're not investing in the right things. So I always say, like, simple is better, right? Like simplifying, I feel, is better than sometimes technology can be not as effective in certain aspects. I don't know what you think about that, but
No, absolutely. And then you've possibly inadvertently opened up a big can of worms for me, which is I actually struggle with ROI as it pertains to human capital, but just because I don't think results are linear, nor do I think they should be. In fact, when I approach organizational coaching contracts, I
Mhm,
actually will not take contracts that specify a certain ROI and productivity or whatever, because I say, look, I'm here to help people increase their self awareness,
mhm,
make good decisions, and spread that throughout the culture through how they lead, how they develop people. And I
mhm,
said, but for me, it starts with people need to feel better and then they do better. And I can't, or nor would I ever try to quantify, like, oh, so and so feels 10% better. But it's
mhm,
hard because you also don't want to imply that this is some fuzzy profession that's really soft and squishy around the edges.
mhm.
So I struggle with how do I say this is all about ROI without being about ROI?
Yeah. And I think it's also some of the things that, and the work that you do as well is it's um it's like a seed, right? That you're planting, and sometimes that seed will grow faster and some other people will grow slower, but it's certainly there, right? And it's like, how do you ROI that seed, right? Like, it's like, but it's there for sure. So yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm curious, what skills have you noticed in the context that you work that are kind of most crucial? You mentioned self-awareness. Is there anything else that is like crucial that you've seen a skill set for leaders, for example?
So, you know, weirdly, and this is something that I've been sort of really thinking about over the past few years, I'm discovering that it's actually less about skill set and more about mindset.
Mm,
Because with the exception of some highly technical skills that do require years of study and practice,
mm-hmm,
most skills that we need in the corporate world can be fairly easily either learned on the job or learned through some sort of study. What I found differentiates one leader from another is the mindset, and specifically growth versus fixed mindset, how we learn, and then resiliency, how we rebound from quote unquote failure.
mm,
Because the skills follow. But if we don't have the mindset, we're not in a position to learn. We're not in a position to take the risks that we need to take to actually possibly be wrong, to make a poor
mm,
decision, which leads us to play it safe because we don't want to put ourselves in a place of feeling terrible or failing or disappointing others. And as the world becomes increasingly unpredictable and changes at exponentially faster rates, it's that resiliency that we need. And it's actually these skill sets that we spend so much time learning that are becoming increasingly obsolete.
yeah, that is such an excellent point. And it's interesting because I wonder if that's kind of why in organizations you rarely have any, or I don't know about you, but I never get like requests for mindset work, right? It's always like skills, like we want them to build the skills. So it's almost like to be
Mhm.
sneaky and like sneak in like, a mindset shift, conversation, like the growth fix, like understanding that, like I think that's so spot on. And I think because skills are again quantifiable, so we tend to go that way, right? As versus like, and it's also mindset. Then people might say, oh, now you're going into therapy. Now you're going into like this other
Mhm.
whole soft and thing of coaching that again, most leaders like that's not what we're going to be sponsoring. So interesting. But you're absolutely correct. At least I mean, in my experience, when you start, I was like, for sure, it's mindset, for sure, and that resilience and the growth. That's very interesting. Very good point. I like the way you describe that.
Thank you. I was thinking, uh-oh, I'll never be invited back. I'm a difficult, controversial guest, but
No,
these
I
are
think
things
it's
that I
very spot
really
on.
care about.
Well,
Thank
you're
you.
spot on, and you are. I mean, you're not saying this from your opinion. It's based on years and years of experience, and you've done this kind of work internationally as well. I'm curious also from that cultural perspective. Have you seen differences in maybe what challenges companies have, what they request in terms of trainings? Is it you know what I mean? Like, what is there any cultural
Mhm.
aspect to it?
So here's what's fascinating to me. The requests are wildly different. The challenges are almost universal.
Mm,
No matter what country I worked in, and I have clients all over the world, we don't understand the young generation is something that we don't just not understand their actions and choices.
mm,
We don't understand how they think. We don't understand what makes them tick. And I feel especially at the onset of some of my coaching engagements, a good like 30% of the time is reassuring these very overworked executives that it's not unique to them, it's not unique to their company, it's not unique to their culture, but it is truly a global phenomenon.
mm,
Um, the other thing that I see as a fairly universal, at least I should be very careful and say universal in the world in which I operate, is that we're trying to figure out how to balance the needs of people as individuals and the needs of teams as a collective. And sometimes that is very, very tangible in the sense of work from home versus work from the office. And then there's this whole slew of equity issues that arise, like work from home. Does everyone have the same access? Is this equally appealing to everyone?
mhm,
Or with real estate sort of going out of control in a lot of markets, what does going to the office actually look like? And is it the same for everyone? And it may come up in a different sort of initial phrasing of the challenge, but I do notice a lot of trends along these lines.
mm. Yeah, that's because at the end of the day, we're all human, right? And I think sometimes we I think we forget that sometimes, and that's like at the end of the day, you're just dealing with people. And just like families are all the same or similar, right? No matter what culture you're like, there's the dynamics of a family is the same everywhere. Same thing in the corporate world. And also a lot of the organizations are very international and multicultural. So it's like the kind of the culture of the organization is typically like a mix.
Yeah.
So it's we're so interconnected these days in the global markets,
Yeah.
so
When I think about when I started working over 25 years ago, sometimes it really did feel like you were being dropped on a different planet.
mm,
And now, because we're so much more connected, we actually do have much more of a common framework and reference,
mm,
which I think makes things interesting because it's a double edged sword. Because on the one hand, yes, we have this greater sense of connection. But on the other hand, sometimes the danger is we think we're more connected than we are. We think we understand more than we do.
mm,
Before you would sort of recognize I'm going somewhere, I'm new, I'm the outsider, and we'd sort of approach this with a degree of humility and openness. I need to
mhm,
learn.
mhm,
And now that we just have this sort of access to a fire hose of information, we inadvertently put ourselves in expert mindset, which is like, I studied this. I know how this culture operates, or I know all about this company because I read their Wikipedia page. And
mm.
we lose that openness, which is in and of itself an opportunity to make a connection with somebody.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because it does if you don't intentionally create a habit of asking yourself like, what don't I know, right? Like, okay, I know maybe this, but like, is there something that I don't know?
Mm.
and it's hard to get out of your own head sometimes. Like it's almost like it's a habit you have to create to like question every time you do something. And I think that's a good practice for anything essentially. I've recently started this because I've had a coaching conversation about this. So I recently started looking at kind of and I've always done this to an extent, but I think now I'm just kind of like elevating it to the next level, is relearning topics I speak about. I don't know if that makes sense, but like really looking into the latest research, right? And making time, like if I'm doing a presentation, if I've done it 100 times or I'm exaggerating, but let's say I've done it 10 times in the last 6 months, something new probably came out, and I've started doing that. I realized I was like, this information is outdated, like even though it was just 6 months ago. So it's like you might feel like you're an expert in X and Y, but so much new information is coming to light every day, and from the technology and the research we have access to now. And I think it's a good practice to do with anything, right? Like in your leadership practice, like you can apply this to anything. Like every conversation you have with a colleague or your team member, and definitely when it comes to like different cultures.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
And it's funny because you touched on, I think, one of the misconceptions that I had when I started out. I said, I'm going to invest all this time in curriculum design. I'm going to have my own perspective. I'm going to curate what I think is the best and
mm,
most advanced thinking out there. And I kind of forgot that it wasn't a one-off process. And
yeah.
so, and it's true. It takes time, but I think it's essential. It's
Mm,
essential that we join people as fellow learners. If we sort of come in saying, I know all this stuff and I am here to impart my brilliant wisdom on you, not only do we risk being wrong or being ill-informed, but it totally shifts the relationship in the room,
hmm
and how much ownership the learners we work with actually take over their own development.
mm. Absolutely. It's a lesson in humility, I guess you can say that, right? I think, yeah. It's easy to get caught up in your mind and what you think you know. And I love the saying, like, you don't know what you don't know, right? So how do you make sure that you remember that all the time, basically? I'm curious also, so you've spent many years working for big firms. At what point did you feel that you're ready to jump ship and say, okay, I think I'm going to just do my own thing from now on? Like, what was that process like?
I'm smiling because you're gonna get a sense that this is my life story. It just kind of happened. So the only wait, I need to pause and really think about this, but
Mm,
the only purely intentional decision that sticks out in my mind was my decision to leave my former firm and take a full year off, and to just be open, to not think about my next career step, but to just explore the world. And
mm,
so I was based in Jakarta at the time. So I fulfilled my ambition to visit every single ASEAN country and to start doing things with my hands. So the two things that I committed to was I took a professional barista course, and it wasn't just, oh, here's how to make pretty coffee drinks. It started with picking coffee beans
mm,
on a plantation, roasting them, and then going through the whole process, learning the history of coffee. And it was the hands-on part that just made me feel so much more connected, both to myself and to my environment. And I should say, I never became a professional barista because I failed latte art. I did amazing. I was a very fast coffee bean picker, but all of my latte art looked like a blob or a cloud. So that was not my talent. And the second thing I started to do was to collect fabric and to start making jewelry as well.
mm,
And both of those were just so foreign to me. The idea of making something beautiful with my hands was just my hands almost didn't know what to do. And then what was really like amazing and so unexpected was I was no longer designing jewelry. It was like the designs chose themselves. I would just pick things and somehow
Mm,
put them together. And it was that really, really important message about you can't think your way through every problem,
mm,
and you cannot fully design a career through the head.
mm,
And so, what led me to opening up my own business was disavowing this idea that there was only one path forward to me, which was to apply for a job and to get another job and to basically do exactly what I'd been doing somewhere else.
mm. That's very powerful. It's again, it's just, it's one of those things that it's so simple yet so powerful. It's just a mindset shift, right? And just like taking a moment and because it's scary, and I think you're very courageous for having done that, because it's scary to just be like, oh, I'm just not gonna think about that, because you feel out of
Well,
control, right?
absolutely. You know what I had to do? And now it almost sounds laughable, but when you're in the moment, you think this decision is going to shape the rest of my life. And what I
Yeah.
had to do was say, I'm trying something. I might be terrible at owning my own business. I might just hate it. And trust me, there are days where it's less glamorous than others, as you well know. But it was this, again, mindset shift from I am choosing the next step in my career to let me see what happens. And I was very lucky actually, because again, without planning it, by just having a conversation with someone, I ended up with a 2-year contract, which for me was the best of both worlds because I had the steady predictability of a job because this was embedded in a government agency. But it also gave me some time to learn about what are the legal aspects of running a business? How do you set up your finances
Mm.
without needing to do marketing? Because I didn't have the capacity to take on additional clients. So when people say, when did you start your business? I always sort of pause and say, how do I answer this question? The only other question that's harder for me is, where are you from? But we can get to that later. Because I set up my business in 2015, but I didn't really go out and face the world until 2018.
Mm.
And so I always say, yeah, it looks like I've been in business for a while, but for 2 years, my business was just an entity to run some unbranded invoices through. So I
Yeah.
really feel like I actually had so that was my soft launch, if you will. And I had my formal launch, I think, more in 2018. And that was interesting because then I had a good sort of year and a half to kind of pivot away from consulting and really focus on the coaching and the OD side of the business. And then the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
Um, so life has given me plenty of messages that have a plan, but don't be wedded to the plan. Have
Yeah.
a plan just to get clear on what's important to you and what you want to try, but not to say this plan will absolutely deliver XYZ. And what I've also realized is when I tried to control things too tightly, I missed beautiful things that were just right in front of me because I had the tunnel vision of, well, this is the plan.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. You already said, and I'm just like, yeah, like I hope people that are listening, and because even for me, it's like it's a self-reflection, and I think anybody who's listening, like, well, yeah, like that's how plans go. They usually don't go that way, but if I think the key is again to that mindset. It's like, but what like what else can it? There could be something else, and like just being flexible. And I think the from what I'm hearing from you is like it's the action. It's just start, just do something, just take that step, right? And you don't have to have it everything figured out. Like maybe you do, but also with an expectation that might not go that way, probably won't, right? So it's there's a joke I like to say. It says if you want to make God laugh, make a plan, right? So So whatever spiritual
Exactly.
religious thing people believe in, but it's a good
Exactly.
point.
No,
Yeah.
it is so true. And yet for the longest time, it felt like that was the only thing at my disposal.
Mm.
So it's really hard to unlearn some of these patterns that are drilled into us at a very young age.
Yeah, yeah, we're definitely conditioned in a very specific way, and it's now there's
Mhm,
this whole thing, not just learning, but unlearning certain
mhm,
thought processes, right? Like unlearning ways of thinking and all of that. It's that's difficult because we have to become somebody else. We have to change who we are essentially, and that is feels impossible to do sometimes.
mhm. No, that's why I was immediately intrigued and just loved that your podcast is called Shift,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, that's all life is. It's a series of shifts.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all about shifts. That's what it's all about. Hear different people's shifts, and you realize that like no story is the same. That's why I love talking to people and sharing these stories. I'm curious also, I don't want to, I'm not going to ask you about your plans after this conversation, after what we just finished talking about, but what are you most excited about, I guess? Let me ask you that. What are you excited about right now and in the coming months for you?
I am excited about embracing the fact that I am the business owner that I am. Because my journey as a business owner went from imposter syndrome. I felt like a little kid playing dress up and like pretending to be a business owner. It just didn't feel like what really this is who I am. And then the next shift was, oh my gosh, all these inspirational podcasts are telling me that I should be making this revenue, I should be hiring this many people, my business should be growing at this breakneck speed. And what I am embracing next year is I don't work for the business works for me. And part of this kind of shift in how I saw my career was 20 years ago, it was all about work really hard and then retire as early as I can and do nothing. I now know not only was that probably not healthy, but a lot of people who go through such an abrupt change actually pass away within 5 years of retirement because sort of their whole purpose of being just kind of evaporates.
Hmm.
And so my new approach to life is I'm going to work as long as I can. And to that note, rather than waiting for retirement, I'm going to start to enjoy life more now. And so I'm going to next year is the year of saying, how can I work hard and still do the important work that I love? I don't want to make it sound like I don't love to work, but I need to practice being about more than work. And so thinking about, does that mean taking longer trips and allocating part of that time to be working trip and the other part to be exploring time? But to say the whole reason you go out for yourself is so that you have flexibility and choice and to really embrace that.
Mm. I love that. I love it. Love it. Um, Before I ask you my last question, where can people find you? Where do you hang out at on social
Oh,
media
what a
in particular?
wonderful question. So I have to be honest, I am not a social media person. The only place that I am active is on LinkedIn. So
Mhm.
people can find me at LinkedIn under the handle Coach Jennifer Hart. Um, and physically, you'll find me occasionally in my home base in the Washington, D.C. area, but hopefully increasingly somewhere in the world. My goal is to get to 50 countries by age 50, and I think I'm pretty close. I'm very excited about that.
That's awesome. And I did actually forget to ask you one more question. Is tell me a little bit more about where you're from, because you are multicultural,
Mhm.
multi-language. You've lived all over the world. So give me that. How do you answer the question where you're from? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that answer, and I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah, it's I immediately bond with people who understand why that is a question that gives me deer in headlights reaction because my life has been a series of random events starting from childhood. So, my mother is of Chinese origin, my father is of English origin. But what was really interesting was I grew up in a household where things were pretty intermingled. So my father spoke fluent Chinese and my mother spoke fluent English. So it wasn't even like our life was segmented into, oh, Chinese with mom, English with dad. And because we grew up overseas, it was also really interesting because my parents had to make a strategic decision about there's going to be a lot of change going on. What is going to be something that feels like home when we're on the move? And so we decided as a family that English was going to be the language of home. So my Chinese absolutely suffered. I speak fluently, but I have the writing ability of a 5-year-old, if that. Um, but I think for me, it helped to create a sense of normalcy and to navigate change, because it's very hard to pick up and move after a few years, especially when
Mhm.
you're moving due to political turbulence or turmoil.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I'm just now at the point where my life is at 50-50. So I spent my life um, living overseas.
Yeah. So repeat that again. You when your thing fell out, but I
Oh,
missed you.
sorry.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
okay.
these are new and apparently they're too big for me. I'm learning. Um,
It's okay. You said your
So
life
I
is
was just saying I
50-50?
spent 50 years, 50% of the time in the States and 50% overseas.
Wow, that's very cool. And the last question I have for you, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Ooh.
Take your time.
Will I really ruin my life if? Because talking about, all the pressure that young people put themselves under and talking about the pressure we put ourselves under,
Mm,
everything for me, and sometimes even to this day, ends up in some sort of doom spiral. And what I've learned, particularly from these amazing stories of resilience, is it's pretty hard to completely ruin your life. I mean, it is possible, but we make every decision seem like it's the make or break. And if we can just say, will this decision really ruin my life? It starts with college. Like, oh my gosh, if I don't go to school X, that's going to ruin my
mm,
life. And the question is, really? Or if I don't go to college, that'll ruin my life.
mm.
And so to just start questioning the stories that we're telling ourselves about the permanence of things and the high negative cost of things or decisions or choices that we make.
That's brilliant. I love that question. I love that question. It's you're right. It's almost like, what's the worst case scenario, right? And how bad is it, basically, right? And is it as bad as we think it is? And usually, to your point, it usually isn't. So, but yet that not asking that holds us back so
Mhm.
much with things that we want to do or pushes us to do things we don't want to do. Yeah, very
Exactly.
powerful question. Jennifer, thank you so much. It's been a beautiful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure my listeners have too. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.